This is BBC News. I'm Gavin Esler. The headlines at 11 o'clock. MPs have condemned Jeremy Corbyn for his handling of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, claiming he's created safe spaces for people with vile attitudes.
There's a very real problem, I'm afraid, within the Labour movement at the moment, and that has come to the surface on his watch, particularly in the last year, and he needs to do something about it.
Hello, good morning and welcome to BBC News. Labour's leader Jeremy Corbyn has been strongly criticised by a group of MPs for failing to provide consistent leadership in tackling anti-Semitism within the party. The Commons Home Affairs Committee said this had created a safe space for those with vile attitudes towards Jewish people. Mr Corbyn says the report is biased against Labour. Ben Bland reports.
The row began with a post on Facebook. 2 years before being elected, the Labour MP Naz Shah had made comments like "the Jews are rallying," had likened Israel to Nazi Germany and suggested relocating Israel to America. She apologised, was temporarily suspended from the Labour Party, though later reinstated. An attempt by former London Mayor Ken Livingstone to defend Shah made matters worse.
Let's remember, when Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism, and his boy went mad and ended up killing 6 million Jews.
You Nazi apologist!
It provoked further outrage, including that confrontation with a Labour MP, and led to Mr Livingstone being suspended. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn strongly denied that anti-Semitic views were tolerated within the party. But in a report, the Home Affairs Committee, made up of MPs from various parties, including Labour, unanimously agree that Jeremy Corbyn had shown a lack of consistent leadership on this issue. They say that created what some have referred to as a safe space for those with vile attitudes towards Jewish people. They accused Labour of demonstrable incompetence at dealing with members accused of anti-Semitism.
There's nothing biased about this. This is not about political point scoring. It's about pointing out we have a serious problem with anti-Semitism in this country. There's at the moment a particular problem within the Labour Party, and it does none of us any good if we don't do something about it, and he needs to do more about it.
In a long response, Mr Corbyn concluded, "Under my leadership, Labour has taken greater action against anti-Semitism than any other party to ensure Labour is a welcoming environment for members of all our communities." The MP's report also criticised the way Lib Dem leader Tim Farron had handled allegations within his party. And it also said that Twitter should do more to tackle hate speech and abuse online. Ben Bland, BBC News.
With me now is Joe Glasman, who's head of political investigations at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. What do you make of this report and what it says about Mr Corbyn?
Well, what we make of the report is that largely it's an extremely good report, backs up what we've been saying for some time now. The central key part of it that is so important is its endorsement of the international definition of anti-Semitism. All these problems of anti-Semitism, not just in the Labour Party but across other parties, require it to be identified. If you don't have a definition that you can use, then it's impossible to say that it's actually taking place. Jeremy Corbyn, as you know, and Baroness Chakrabarti omitted a definition from the report, and I think what's really clear is that that's what's missing. This international definition exists. It's endorsed by this country, 31 other countries, and the United Nations. And it seems that what needs to happen is that the recommendations are taken forward, that it should be formally endorsed by government, by institutions, and by political parties, the CPS and the police as well. It's only from that starting point that anything can be done at all.
Because if you don't know what you're talking about, you can't address the problem or the perception.
That's right.
But I mean, the report, I know Mr Corbyn has said it's biased against him, although there were Labour MPs on the committee, but the report suggests a degree of incompetence about dealing with it. That's in effect what they're saying.
Yes, they did use the word incompetence, and I think to a certain extent, perhaps ignorance. I mean, in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee, he attempted to define anti-Semitism himself, and he said it's hating Jews for what they are. But anyone who knows about anti-Semitism knows that it's hating Jews for what they are not. It's largely based on conspiracy theory, and that's what really distinguishes it from other forms of racism. It ultimately expresses itself as racism because after you've lived with a theory that Jews are poisoning your wells or undermining your economy, you find there's a bunch of human beings down the street that you can then persecute. So really and truly, he does not seem to actually grasp the nature of anti-Semitism, and particularly post-war anti-Semitism.
Help out those people in this country who feel, look, they look at the policies of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu in particular. Many people don't like them, and they're not being anti-Semitic. I take it, you know, it doesn't fit in your definition if they say, look, we don't like your settlement policy or whatever it is. So how do people criticise Israel if they feel that's what they want to do, without appearing to slip into anti-Semitism?
Well, I think that's where the definition is so useful, because this international definition says explicitly that criticism of Israel is legitimate, of the elected Israeli government. What's happened since the Second World War in certain parts of the world, and particularly on the hard left, is the reinvention of anti-Semitism that casts Israel as the Jew among nations. So all the terrible things that used to be said about Jewish communities are now said about Israel as a state, that it controls the banks, that it's an apartheid state, that it does all sorts of awful things. There is, the committee has looked very carefully at the particular thing you're talking about, and it's suggested a couple of minor recommendations that address those. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but this difference between demonising and criticising is incredibly clear. I think if you went to Israel and you saw how critical the press was there, you get a very good idea of the levels that exist in that country. So they're certainly allowable outside.
Okay, Joe, we'll leave it there. Joe Glasman, thanks very much.